I'm sure you all know of Helen Bedford, who is a senior lecturer in children's health at the Institute of Child Health. Now, actually, Helen and I go back quite a long time when I worked at the Institute of Child Health, and she was a great pal of mine. And, you know, sometimes when you leave an organisation, you're sad that you don't keep in touch. Well, that doesn't happen with Helen, because if I'm pining for her, I just switch the television on.
Oh, stop it.
She's chuntering on about immunisation.
Chuntering on.
So there you are, you've got a star speaker, as ever. All your speakers have been star speakers today. But I think we're all very proud of Helen as a health visitor who really has become a nationally recognised expert in the field of immunisation. So we're certainly looking forward. Now, can I take this opportunity just before Helen speaks to remind those that have just come in, could you please turn off your mobiles totally turn them off, and let's hope this stops the interference that we were having earlier today. So without any further ado, could we welcome Helen to give us immunisation updates. Over to you, Helen.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Chuntering on, I don't know. Okay, what I'm going to do today is to give you an update on immunisation, and as you will be aware, there are a load of new things that are literally coming in as we speak. So I thought it was very important just to take you quickly through those so that you can talk to parents effectively about them. And I'm afraid there are quite a lot of things, and it's not my fault, but it is important that you know what's going on and some of the rationale for why these changes have come about. So just to remind you, you don't need reminding that immunisation is a very important part of the Healthy Child programme, and I know that you all do a lot of other really important work, but if you can just protect children from infectious disease, that's, you know, a whole amazing thing that you're doing for children. And, you know, in other countries, parents would be clamouring to get their hands on these vaccines. So health visitors and school nurses play a very important role in advising parents and young people themselves about vaccination. And in some areas, health visitors vaccinate, and school nurses obviously do. And I would like to see more health visitors actually administering the vaccines. But we know that recently there has been some loss of public confidence in vaccines. We've had the MMR scare and we've had various other things. And what we know from research is that trust is absolutely pivotal in maintaining and restoring confidence in vaccines. And how you get trust is often talking to a very well-informed healthcare professional. In fact, if you look at all the research, what people say is, even people that have rejected immunisation in the past, that talking to this is mainly American stuff, so it's paediatrician or nurse, was the thing that made the difference and made me come back to vaccination. So don't underestimate the influence you can have with parents out there that are worried about vaccination. And obviously being well informed is the foundation for an effective communication. So what I'm going to do is take you through the current UK schedule and the confirmed changes to the schedule in 2003. That is the introduction of rotavirus vaccine, change to the timing of men's C vaccine. We're going to start giving all 2-year-olds flu vaccine later in the year, and shingles vaccine is being introduced for adults. I'll be very sketchy on that one because obviously that's not.
Will there be a handout for this?
Yes, yes, it'll be on the.
No, just some of us haven't got it in the packs.
No.
I see. Okay.
I'm going to talk quickly about the latest on MMR vaccine and measles outbreaks, pertussis vaccine in pregnant women, and possible future addition to the schedule of meningococcal B vaccine if we have time. So you can see there's a lot going on. So here is the current schedule. So these 2 vaccines, BCG and hepatitis B, are only given to children at high risk. These are not routine vaccines. BCG is offered in areas where the prevalence of TB is over a particular rate, and Hep B is obviously only offered to babies of mothers who are positive for Hep B infection. These are the routine vaccines, so at 8 weeks, 12 weeks, and 5 in 1. At 8 weeks, they get their first dose of pneumococcal conjugate vaccine. At 12 weeks, a dose of meningococcal C, and just about to go or gone already, a second dose of MenC vaccine at 16 weeks along with PCV. At 12 months, if they need to get Hep B, they should get a dose then. They also usually have their serology tested to see if they're infected. 12 to 13 months, booster vaccines of Hib, MenC and PCV and the first dose of MMR vaccine. Just before starting school, a second dose of MMR, very important, it's a second dose, not a booster, and their preschool booster. And if they need Hep B, they should get another dose then. And then at 12 to 13 years, HPV vaccine for girls only, that's 3 doses, and a teenage booster of tetanus, diphtheria and IPV. And the general rule is if you've had 5 doses of tetanus, polio and diphtheria, that's sufficient for life unless you're going to be doing something that is particularly risky. So the new schedule, this is where we are now. A few things are going to happen to this, so keep your eyes on the screen. We've got MenC going at the 4-month visit. The second dose of MenC is going. We've got rotavirus vaccine coming in at 8 weeks and 12 weeks. That's from the 1st of July. We've got influenza vaccine for all 2-year-olds coming in later in the year from about September. We've got the third dose of MenC is now coming into the teenage years. At the moment, between the ages of 13 and 14, but ultimately it's going to be put in with the teenage booster, which is all going to be given ideally at 13 to 14 years. So does anybody want to ask me anything about those specifics before we get going on to a bit of rationale? Well, in areas of outbreaks, they do often give MMR earlier, yes, so it can be given earlier. The only reason it's given prior to preschool is because children are coming in for their preschool booster. You can give MMR vaccine at any interval after the first dose. If a child is over the age of 18 months, you need to leave a 3-month gap. Under the age of, a 1-month gap. Under the age of 18 months, a 3-month gap. That's the only rule, but in certain parts of the country where there's an outbreak situation, they do offer MMR earlier. Okay, so let's get on to the diseases. So the introduction of rotavirus vaccine, that's coming in on the 1st of July. Rotavirus is the most common cause of severe gastroenteritis in infants and young children. Now, parents are very familiar with gastroenteritis, but they're not going to be so familiar with the word rotavirus. So this is going to have to be explained what you're actually protecting babies against. And it's estimated that in the world there's about almost 500,000 deaths from rotavirus. But obviously most of those, virtually 90% of them, are in poor countries. You don't get many deaths in this country. It's about a handful, 4 or 5 deaths a year from rotavirus. But in industrialised countries, it's the main pathogen responsible for hospital admissions for diarrhoea. So there's about 750,000 episodes of diarrhoea per year. Most children by the age of 5 will have encountered rotavirus. And just as a little extra note, the reason it's called rotavirus is because if you look carefully at the organism, it's shaped like a wheel. So there's a little bit of nerdy information for you. This graph shows very clearly that most children get rotavirus in the sort of first 3 years of life. So that's where the bulk of these infections are. And don't look at all the detail on here, but just to say that rotavirus costs the NHS an awful lot of money. It's been estimated it costs it nearly £15 million a year. And that's in terms of hospital admissions, accident and emergency admissions, GP consultations and NHS Direct. Now, increasingly, all the time actually, when they introduce new vaccines, one of the prime considerations is cost effectiveness. So they don't just say, okay, this seems like a good idea. They have to look in detail at the cost effective, the economics of introducing a vaccine. And this vaccine is being introduced because it's going to save an awful lot of money to the NHS. Now, there is a little bit of a back history with rotavirus, which I think may present challenges for talking to some parents. And that is that they introduced a rotavirus vaccine in the United States in 1998. It was called RotaShield. But it was suspended very quickly afterwards because there were cases of intussusception. That's when the bowel telescopes on itself, and you can get intestinal blockage. And these were clustered 13 to 14 days after the first dose. So they stopped using it. They suspended using it completely. But in the interim, they've been looking at new vaccines, and they've developed something called Rotatech, which was introduced in 2006. And they also have introduced a vaccine called Rotarix, which was introduced to the States in 2008. And we are going to be using Rotarix. Now, in trialling these vaccines, because of the previous history of intussusception, they had enormous trials. So the trials consisted of between 60 and 70,000 infants, because this is still quite a rare event, and they needed to have huge trials to actually work out precisely what was happening with this vaccine and whether there would be any risk from intussusception. And I think it's important to tell parents that this has been tested on that number of children and used in America since 2008. So this is a live attenuated vaccine which is given by mouth. So it's not injected. Unlike anything else in the schedule, it's given by mouth, and it's effective against the 5 strains that cause virtually all the disease. The first dose needs to be given no later than 15 weeks, and the second dose no later than 24 weeks. And that's because the older you are, they think there's a bigger risk of intussusception. So it's very, very important that children are immunised in a timely fashion to get this protection in, but not to put them into, to be overdue, basically. And the trials and practice show it's highly effective against severe rotavirus disease. That's the sort of rotavirus disease that takes you into hospital. It's virtually 100% protective in the first year of life. There are side effects. There are side effects with everything. These include diarrhea, irritability, and intussusception. There's a question mark over it. There may be 1 or 2 extra cases of intussusception, because it is a normally occurring condition as well, per 100,000 doses. But the view is that the risk is much, much lower than the benefit from this vaccine. So there are all sorts of resources for you to find out more about it. There was a joint letter from DH, Public Health England, and the NHS, which came out in April, which describes the changes. There's a new book in the chapter in the Green Book. And when you're looking for information in the Green Book, don't go to the hard copy anymore. Always, always go online, because the last hard copy was published in 2006, so it's way out of date. There's a question and answer sheet for healthcare professionals on Public Health England website, and there's lots of leaflets and flyers for parents, so it's all around. You will have to go and have a rummage for it, because everything has changed in the last month. So it's quite difficult to pin these things down. Okay, the next thing I just wanted to touch on briefly was the change in the timing of the meningococcal C vaccine. So as you know, meningococcal C vaccine was introduced in 1999, and it's been incredibly successful. There are no deaths now from meningitis C in this country. But they are changing the timing of the schedule. And the reason for this is because when you do a trial on a vaccine, you can only learn so much, because you're only doing it on a limited number of people. It's only until you start using it in practice on millions of children that you actually learn more about how the vaccine behaves. And after use, what we've found about all the conjugate vaccines, so that's Men-C, Hib and PCV, is that if you give the vaccine to a young baby under a year, it works well, but the effectiveness and the antibodies wear off very quickly. So that's what they found with all these vaccines, and that's why they introduced the boosters at 12 to 13 months. So it's important to vaccinate them in infancy, because that's when a lot of disease occurs. But the vaccine, the effectiveness of the vaccine, the protectiveness isn't going to last for a very long time. So as I said, they found that effectiveness and antibody actually persist if you give older children 1 dose. And that's why they introduced the booster at 12 to 13 months for all 3 conjugate vaccines. That came in October 2006. But what they found now is that antibody wanes after this booster too. So, we're chasing our tails a little bit. So we had to do something to address this. The other issue is that there is a cohort of children who are entering adolescence, so they're coming up to university age, who only ever got one dose of Mense when it was introduced in son is one of these very people. So he was little, he was 4 when it was introduced, and he just got one dose. And there is evidence that the effectiveness of that one dose won't probably persist into adulthood. So what they've decided to do is to take out the 4-month dose of Mense, because they also know that just one dose of Mense in infancy is enough. You don't get any extra benefit by having 2 doses. So you just give 1 dose in infancy, a booster at 12 months, which is going to keep you going a bit longer. And then you want a dose in adolescence, which is going to give you protection into adulthood. So this is quite an important change to the schedule, but it is difficult to explain to parents, because, they think, well, doesn't it work? Well, it does work, but we know that the effectiveness wears off. So a very important thing that we're doing. So we've now got what they call a 1+1 schedule. And what this does is it gives direct protection for the person getting the vaccine, but we're also going to get herd immunity, because one of the things these conjugate vaccines do is it stops you carrying the organism. And if you can do that, you get herd immunity. So this is felt to be the most appropriate way of taking forward our meningococcal C protection. Is everybody okay with that? Any questions at this point? It doesn't happen, I don't think.
Does everybody hear the question?
It's about transmission of rotavirus through the nappies. Have a look on the thing. I think it doesn't happen, but you need to check that. Okay, so the next thing is routine influenza vaccine. So we know that children are a very important source of influenza infection. They're called super spreaders, because you know what little kids are like. I mean, all over the place. So they're an important source of infection, not only for themselves, but for other vulnerable people who may be really ill if they get influenza, and of course for elderly people. So what they're introducing ultimately is a universal influenza vaccine program for all children aged 2 to 16 years. But they're going to be doing it gradually. So what they're going to do is, first of all, start with the 2-year-olds, who are the real super spreaders, and they're going to do some pilot studies later in the year to find out what the best way of working this program is. They're going to be using a live attenuated nasal spray for this program, and children under 9 need to have 2 doses on their first occasion. So we're just starting off with the 2-year-olds, and we don't know any more details at that. There's no further guidance has been issued at this point, so look out for this in the letters that come out. But what we do know is that they're using this live attenuated nasal spray. So it literally, you put it up their nose, they get a dose up each nostril. And the reason they're using this is because this is the only vaccine that has a high efficacy in children. So the injectable inactivated vaccine we use for other groups isn't so good for children. And at the moment, what they're thinking is that obviously the young children, 2 to 4-year-olds, will be targeted via GPs, and the older children, for school nurses here, don't groan, will be targeted via schools, and it will be an annual program. They'll need to be vaccinated every year. Nasal administration is more acceptable for children. I would be interesting to see what they think of that, actually, because I don't know, I'd like having something stuffed up my nose, but there you go. So this is coming through gradually over time. I know you don't usually need to know about vaccines for the elderly, but it's just useful for you to know about this, that they're introducing a shingles vaccine for over 70-year-olds. So what happens with shingles is you get a primary infection with a virus as a child, chickenpox. And it's most common in young children. It's transmitted very, very effectively. And it's greater risk of complications for babies and for pregnant women and those people with immunocompromise. What happens with shingles is you have an infection with chickenpox as a child, and the virus becomes latent in your dorsal spinal area, and it can be reactivated later on when your immune system's a bit shot for whatever reason, usually because you're a bit older. And you get this rash that follows the pattern of the sensory nerve, so you can see that very clearly at the top. It's really painful, it can scar, and it's infectious. So if somebody with shingles comes in contact with a child who hasn't had chickenpox, the child can get chickenpox. But people can't get shingles from somebody with chickenpox because you have to have had chickenpox yourself. So this is one of those urban myths, you know, that if you're an old person, stay away from children with chickenpox because you'll get shingles. It doesn't work like that. It's infectious, so you can pass it on and it becomes chickenpox to other people, but it can't be caught. Shingles cannot be caught from another person. About 50 people die every year from shingles. So that's around, just for your own general information. And the vaccine they use is just like a really, really, really strong dose of chickenpox. It's a single dose and it needs to be given subcutaneously. So I'm just quickly going to go look at what's happening with MMR vaccine. And just to remind you, to take you through some of the history of MMR vaccine, we used to use a single attenuated measles vaccine in young children. That was introduced in 1968, and we used that for 20 years before we introduced MMR in 1988. At the same time as that measles vaccine program, we had a rubella vaccination program which targeted prepubertal girls and non-immune women. So it was just given to girls and non-immune women who are about the age that they get HPV now. So the aim of that program is you give an individual girl protection so that if she catches rubella, she doesn't pass it on to her baby. What happened, that program was discontinued in 1996, and in place of it, we introduced MMR. Now, the idea or the aim of MMR is to eliminate measles, mumps, rubella completely, get rid of them. And if you eliminate rubella from children, then there isn't any rubella basically to pass on to pregnant women. It's a better way of controlling congenital rubella syndrome than immunising schoolgirls. So that's why we changed. And we only changed to MMR after we'd been watching very closely what was happening in the United States, where they'd been using MMR since 1972. So if anybody says we don't know anything about MMR, it's been in use in America since 1972. We know a lot about it. The second dose of MMR was introduced in 1996, but as I said, it can be given, it's timetable to be given before school entry, but it can be given much sooner. So if you give 100 children one dose of MMR, most of them will be protected against rubella. 98 of them will be protected against rubella. Between 90 and 95 will be protected against measles. That is not enough to get rid of measles. You need a higher uptake, higher level of immunity than you get with that one dose. And that's because measles is incredibly infectious. If you don't believe me, just look at Wales, and that shows you how infectious this disease is. Mumps is the least good bit of the vaccine, about 85% effective, could even be as low as 65% effective, so not a brilliant vaccine. So the reason we give 2 doses is because we want to get herd immunity so we can get rid of the diseases. You need to get higher levels of immunity than you do with 1 dose. And if you give everybody 2 doses of MMR, you get virtually 98, 90%, 89% protection against those 3 diseases. Just a quick whiz through the diseases. Obviously, they're all viral. I'm just going to pick out some key points about them. Measles is incredibly infectious. And what happens is, if one person has got measles, they will infect 14 people. Then those 14 people will go and infect another 14 people. So that's why you get these massive outbreaks, because if it's introduced into a susceptible population, it's just like a house fire. About 1 in 15 people have complications when they have measles. So this is things like pneumonia, convulsions, ear infections, encephalitis. Although the data that's coming from this new outbreak actually shows that about 1 in 10 children are being admitted to hospital. With mumps, the complications affect girls as well as boys. There is this urban myth that mumps is only dangerous for boys. Well, it's equally dangerous for girls. You can get encephalitis, meningitis, pancreatitis, inflammation of the ovaries you can get with mumps. So it's a nasty infection for both boys and girls, but it gets the sort of, reputation because it causes inflammation of the testes. So, if anything's going to affect men badly, they're going to go on about it, aren't they? There isn't any good evidence to show mumps makes men sterile. It might make them subfertile, but there is no really hard evidence showing that mumps makes people sterile. And my key point about rubella is that this is a totally innocuous disease, German measles, if you catch it. In fact, it's so mild that very often all you get is a fleeting rash. You don't even know you've had it. The problem with rubella, and the only reason we vaccinate against it, is that if a woman catches it in the first 12 weeks of pregnancy, there's a very high risk the baby will be extremely badly damaged. So that's the main reason, the only reason for immunising against rubella. That's a child with cataracts who's got congenital rubella syndrome, which is just one of the things. They get heart problems, they get sensory neural deafness, and eye problems is the classic things that you get with congenital rubella. I won't go through these because I don't think we've got time, but just to show you how measles, the confirmed cases of measles, have been clocking up over the years, with the largest number last year for almost 2 decades. These 2 red stars are deaths from measles, so these are children, teenagers, who had conditions which meant they had to take drugs that suppressed their immune system, so they couldn't be immunised. They caught measles and died from it, which I think is just the absolutely most tragic thing. If your child is, being treated for some horrible disease and then they go and die from measles. Mumps incidence, again, I'll talk a little bit about that. Some of you will be aware that we have been seeing very large outbreaks of mumps in older age people. So these are older teenagers, young adults, basically born, the peak for the age group is people born between 1985 and 1989. So if you think back to when MMR came in, we didn't immunise against mumps at all before MMR came in. These are people that when MMR came in, they didn't get it because they were too old, or they only got 1 dose because we didn't introduce the second dose till 1996, and they didn't catch mumps when they were young. So there have been lots of outbreaks, particularly in university settings, that sort of place. So in 2012, there were almost 2,500 cases of mumps, and the majority have been linked with outbreaks in universities. Many confirmed cases are still unvaccinated or have only had 1 dose. And you remember I showed you how not very good the mumps component is. It's not as good as the other components. So you really do need 2 doses of MMR to protect you against mumps. It's very, very important. In fact, my oldest son actually caught mumps last year. He'd had 2 doses of MMR. He was 20. He got a very, very mild attack of mumps. So you still can see these cases in people that have had 2 doses. So what they're recommending now is that new entrants to university and colleges must have 2 doses of MMR before commencing their studies, because it's in this sort of environment when you're mixing with loads of new people that you've not met before, and we all know what unspeakable things university students get up to. Infections spread very, very quickly. And what we now know about MMR is that data from the United States suggests not only that the mumps component isn't so protective, but also the immunity you get from the vaccine wears off over time. And that is thought also to contribute to the outbreaks in university students. So really important 2 doses for all 3 infections, but particularly for measles and mumps. And before I came out, actually, there was a press release from Swansea Public Health Unit to say they are seeing an increase in mumps cases as well. So we're going to start seeing that next. I won't go through that slide. Okay, 5 minutes. Oh. Okay, just a quick whiz. Now, you all know why everybody was worried about MMR. It was because of publication in The Lancet in 1998, which was interpreted as showing a link between MMR vaccine and autism and bowel disease. It didn't show a link. It was interpreted that way. One of the authors stood up at a press conference and said, I think that we should be using single vaccines at yearly intervals. This was his personal view. He didn't present any evidence to support that suggestion, and 13 years later he still stands by that suggestion, but he still hasn't produced any scientific evidence to support that idea. So it's in his head. A lot of publicity over the years, I don't need to tell you, but all I need to say is it any wonder that parents were afraid of MMR, given the sustained negative publicity that went on and on and on? It really is not surprising. And, it's difficult trying to convince parents otherwise. But now we have a large body of evidence. There's at least 14 sound studies all of them showing no evidence, showing evidence of no link between MMR, autism, and bowel disease. In fact, there isn't a single good piece of evidence for a link. And also these studies have been reviewed by expert committees all over the place, USA, UK, Canada. So absolutely no evidence. Won't go through that. Just want to talk about the outbreak. So this is what we saw last year in 2012. I don't usually use pictures from the newspaper, but this is actually quite graphic. This is the Daily Mirror. So this shows you where the cases were in 2012, and you can see cases in South Wales, but also look at this huge outbreak in the northwest. And the reason it probably didn't get publicity is because it's in a lot of different cities. It's in Liverpool, Manchester, so it's spread out. But lots and lots of cases of measles. And you know that there have been huge numbers of cases this year, and the latest total from South Wales is 1,400 cases of measles. And this is affecting these people. So these are the people that didn't get vaccine in 2013, older children, these people who in 2002 were toddlers because their mum and dad still couldn't decide about MMR. And years on, 11 years on, they still can't decide about MMR, and these are the children that are now catching measles. Uptake of MMR is very, very good in 2-year-olds. It's about 93% across the country. Obviously, there are pockets where it's lower. It's this age group who never got it and never caught up. And this shows you the cases by age. So we have measles cases in all ages, but you can see the bulk of them are in older children, teenagers, who, when they get these diseases, get them very seriously, because all the childhood diseases are much worse if you catch them when you're older. There's the cues. This is to show you cover data for selected PCTs. This is the second dose of MMR at 5 years. And you can see that in England, it's about 88%. But there are certain parts of the country, like Sutton and Merton, where less than 70% of 5-year-olds have got 2 doses of MMR. So there's quite a lot of work needs to be done out there, encouraging people to have the vaccine. Okay. Have I got time just to talk about, should I talk about pertussis vaccine in pregnancy? Why? No? Yes? Yes? Okay. So you know that this programme was announced last year. So pregnant women are now being offered pertussis vaccine between 28 and 38 weeks of pregnancy. The reason for this is because we were seeing a very sharp incline in pertussis cases in young babies. That red line are the under 3-month-olds, and they are the people who, if they catch pertussis, have a high risk of death. So 13 babies died from whooping cough last year. Pertussis isn't very nice at any age, but it's particularly awful under the age of 6 months, because that's where all the deaths are. You don't tend to die of pertussis at an older age. So they had to think very quickly, what are we going to do? How are we going to, stop this outbreak? And of course, the problem is that the age group of the children affected are the babies before they even get to their first dose of vaccine. It takes a couple of weeks for the vaccine to work, so it's almost too late. So they had to think logically, what are we going to do? And in the States, they've been offering pertussis vaccine to pregnant women for a year longer than us. And the rationale for this is that the people that infect babies are their mothers, basically. Most babies that catch pertussis catch it from their mothers or their fathers. So if you can immunise pregnant women, you stop them catching pertussis so they don't pass it on, but also, and this is theoretical, they're going to have antibodies which will go across the placenta and protect the baby. And you may also get increased antibodies in breast milk, but it's unclear if those antibodies actually protect the baby. But this is the rationale. So the idea is you offer mothers a single dose of vaccine. They need to have it in every pregnancy, and this was an outbreak response measure. What we've seen is cases of pertussis have gone down. Whether this is due to the vaccine programme or whether it's just was going that way anyway is unclear. But what we do know is that there's been a reduction in cases, that we know the vaccine seems to be working very well, that actually mothers are fine about this. Their attitudes are very positive. So 60% of pregnant women were accepting the vaccine, which is very good. But there are challenges. So when do we stop? And it was announced just last week or so that they're actually continuing the programme for another year. We need to think about pertussis in the long term, because to sum it up, it's a very complicated disease. Your immunity from the vaccine wears off over time, but also your immunity from natural over time. So we've got to think about how we're going to protect people from pertussis in the future. One of the key things is that we know a lot of adults get pertussis, but they don't get it diagnosed because they don't whoop. They just get a long, protracted cough, so it never gets diagnosed as pertussis. And that obviously means it's a bit difficult in terms of control. I've run out of time, haven't I? Okay, just one that might come in the future is meningococcal B vaccine. This is the main source of meningococcal disease now. They're discussing it at the moment. We've got to be sure that it's cost effective. If it does come in, it will mean 3 doses in the primary schedule. And just to direct you to, this is the where all the stuff about immunisation is for professionals. So if you go to this, I keep forgetting what these places are called. What is it? Public Health England. Public Health England. This is the website. If you go to this website, you can get access to the Green Book, to all the leaflets for parents, all the leaflets for health professionals. So this is a sort of hub where all the information is. Okay.
Would you like to leave that slide on? So
okay.
Just, it'll be captured as well, I think, Dave. Is that right? Yep. In your resource. Excellent. I think we really need to take time for questions. Can I hold on to you, Dave, for a minute?
I just wanted to ask if it's likely to have a chickenpox vaccine for children, because that seems to have a big impact on the community.
Well, I think at the moment it's unlikely. It's one of these things that's under discussion all the time, just as a universal hepatitis B vaccine is under discussion all the time. The things that would stop them is that we don't want to make chickenpox an adult disease, because it's worse if you catch it when you're an adult. And if you don't get good uptake of chickenpox vaccine, that is halfway to making it an adult disease. And the other thing is that we're being very, very careful with MMR vaccine at the moment. We've got good uptake. If we did introduce varicella vaccine, it would be given at the same time as MMR, or maybe even as part of MMR. So, you don't want to sort of upset the apple cart quite yet. So it's there on the list of things they discuss, but there's no indication that it is going to be introduced in the near future.
Dave?
I just wanted to say there was the question about whether you need to be careful about changing nappies. NHS choices say yes. So there's a bit of information on there just about the vaccine contains a weakened form of the rotavirus. The traces of it in the baby's nappy won't harm healthy people, but it could pose a risk for people with a weak immune system. So as a precaution, encourage people that have had recently vaccinated babies to take special care with personal hygiene.
Thank you very much.
Lady here, yes?
Yes. Well, there is that issue, and I'm very sort of ambivalent about this, because they're right. It's better to get it when you're a child, but it goes against the grain for me to deliberately expose your child to an infectious disease, and you don't know you don't know if somebody's pregnant, because chickenpox isn't, or immunosuppressed. So it's a very difficult one. In America, they market on the internet chickenpox lollipops, so you send off.
We have two questions. I think lady at the back and then lady at the front. Please, yes.
The measles outbreak in Wales, those of us, I work in the Midlands, and we're a little bit concerned about the summer holidays, because half of the Midlands goes to Wales, and we're getting an awful they just go that way naturally. They find the seaside's closer there. But our concern, we get an awful lot of phone calls from parents that came back from Wales in the holidays recently, and we were talking the other day about how busy it's going to be on the phone come June, end of July, August. We're struggling on what to advise, because these children are immunised, but
well, if they're immunised, if they've had 2 doses of MMR, they should be very well protected. But if they haven't had 2 doses, then maybe they should get a second dose, whatever their age.
So we can send them to the doctors and say, if you're worried, go back and get another one.
It's a travel vaccine almost. They're going to. If they're going to an outbreak area, which South Wales is, then I think it's justified. The thing that worries me are the young babies that we don't immunise them. What do we do with those? Because they can still catch measles, and the consequences for a child under 1 can be very severe. So it's...
We had a couple of mums of 6-month-olds that asked if they could get the MMR early so that they could continue with their holidays, and that wasn't anything we were able to get clear advice on.
Well, you can immunise them over the age of 6 months. Between 6 months and a year, you can give MMR vaccine, but they still need to get the 2 doses after the age of a year because it's not so effective under the age of 1.
This is the final question now. Thank you.
Can I just ask if there's any benefit in actually moving the second scheduled MMR dose to 2 years to coincide the fact that we're going to have increased funding for 2-year-olds. We're going to have more 2-year-olds going into early years settings, theoretically, and that's really about the last scheduled universal contact we have with the health visiting service.
Well, I mean, that's a very good idea, but write to David Salisbury. I mean, I'm sure they've thought about this. But it's not on the cards yet for whatever reason.
Thank you. Can we show our appreciation to Helen for a brilliant overview? And be assured you will get access to the handouts via the cloud, probably. I have no idea, but you're gonna get it. Thank you so much indeed.